Hello everyone and welcome to the first part of this tutorial series. In this one I'll be showing you how to serialize your JSON data using the built value package and also how to manage your state using the scoped model package. So here is an example response from the Nestoria API of a search of a place called Brighton, which is located in UK. So this is an example response of what the API gives. So you can see it returns a request and also a response, but we wouldn't be working with this request object currently. We'll just head over to the response. So inside the response, we have the listings, which is just an array of property. That is the results based on this search over here. So the thing we'll be needing from here is the response and also the listings array. And inside the listing array, you can see it is made up of different property results. So this is the first property result, and also you have the next one. So there is a simple trick first of all close this. Okay, so there's a simple trick I use to build immutable classes. So first things first, let's talk about what build value is. So build value creates immutable models for our JSON serialization. So what immutability simply means is to create kind of like a model or a class whereby the state can't be changed once it is created. So some of the benefits of immutability is you have better encapsulation, because whenever you create immutable models, you can only get the properties. You can't set them somewhere else in your application. But when I implement this, you'd understand what this actually means. So first things first is we need the response. So I'll head over to Android Studio and see we need response. And inside the response, we need the listings, which is going to be a list. And inside the listing, we have properties, which is going to be a list of property. And for this property, we have different items inside. But for now, we'll just make use of the title and the summary. So title, summary. So let's create the classes for this. So the first thing we'll do would be to create a general class for this response. So I'm going to create a general model for this response that encapsulates or that houses our entire response, and I'll name it Nestoria, just simply because of we're using the Nestoria API. So that is how I actually name my classes. So the first one is I'm going to name it Nestoria. Nestoria. Cool. So one thing I'm going to mention first of all is the imports. So you import this build value, which is going to be the values, and we also import the serializer, which I'm going to talk about soon, and also build collection. So what build collection is just the list version of build that. So you use build collection to generate build lists, which is build values way of creating a list. So back to the code. So Nestoria, inside Nestoria, we need a response. So I'll create that variable called response, and it's going to be a getter, and it's going to be of type response. So now this class doesn't exist, so we have it here, so we're going to create it right now. So build response. Cool. So inside response, we need what does response need? Inside response, we have listings, which is going to be a list of property. So we head back to Android Studio and we create listings, which is going to be the built list. Remember, that is what this built collection does. So it's going to be a built list of property. Cool. And it's going to be a getter. So we don't set values directly when you're creating immutable models. So the next thing is we're going to create, so listings, we've done that, so we'll remove this. Would also remove response. So the next thing is to create the so it's to create the property. So this model here, or this structure, is going to be the structure for one property, the second property, and all this stuff is going to be inside the listings. So the listings is just an array or a list of properties. So let's create the property model. So we'll name this property. Cool. So what do we need from property? We need title and summary. So it's gonna be string gets title. The second one is string, it's gonna return a string. So string gets summary. So we can comment this stuff right now. So over here we have nestoria.g.dat, which is going to be the generated file, which is going to be generated for us. So back to our popspec.yaml, the first thing we have here, we have the build value, which is for values like string and ints. Then build collection, which is for list of values. We also have in our dev dependency build runner. So build runner is going to be the plugin that's going to generate the code for us. We also have build value generators. These two work hand in hand. So it is this stuff that's going to be responsible for generating the code, which is going to be contained in nestoria.g.dat. So currently we can see some errors over here, and that is okay, and that is caused simply because we've not generated this file. So after we do this, the next thing to do would be to create a serializer for each of this model. Let me check something. Let me check if I'm using the right. Okay, you can see built values provide immutable value types, which means their states can be changed when they are created. It also provides us with JSON serialization. So, and that's the next thing we want to do right now. So we'll create a serializer, and it's going to be a static member. So serializer, yeah. It's going to be of type Nestoria, which is the enclosing class. Then we'll give it a name. Remember, this is immutable type, so you just have to get serializer and Nestoria serializer. Yeah. So this stuff is going to be generated for us. This serializer is going to be generated thanks to built value. So I'll just copy this, I'll just duplicate that, and okay, so I'm done with the duplication. So you can see the basic structure of our built value model. So you can see the first one is the enclosing API class, which is Nestoria, and inside Nestoria response, inside Nestoria we have a response, which is over here, this response, and inside response we have listings, which is just a list of property. So you can see the classes over here. So we have Nestoria and we have response, which is a list which contains listings, which are just list of properties over here. So you can see the basic flow or the basic structure of immutable types using build value. So the next thing to do would be to actually generate this class, this nestorial.g.dat. And to do that, we'll head over to our terminal and we'll put in this command, flutter packages pub run build runner build. Oops. It's Flutter with the double T. So this stuff is independent of the API call. This is just a class that will be used to serialize our JSON response. So this is just going to generate the structure we'll be using. So I'll wait for this to build, then we'll continue. So you can see it's completed, but it gave me an error initially. And the reason is that my serializer over here needs to have an underscore. So whenever you declare a serializer, the returning value should have an underscore before the $sign. So you have to update that for all classes over here, because that is what build value generates. So now we're done with this for now. We'll still come back to this to add more stuff to it. So the next thing to do would be to work with scoped model. So cool. Widget test. Okay, why are you giving me some error? Let me see. Okay, the import statement, because I commented Flutter that Flutter test, so I just comment the whole file, and also nestorial.g generated code. Let's see. Okay, it's no errors. Okay, I think because I've not added it to my JIT, but we'll leave that for now. So the next thing to do would be to work with scoped model. So let me create a file first of all before I explain how scoped model works. So we'll create that file called property scoped model. That. Okay, property. Yep, I want to add you. So the way scope model works is simple. So you have a central file or central store or central model where you perform all your whole data manipulation. So in your model file, you could actually make requests from an external API. You could change variables, you could update local state and all those stuffs, but everything is going to be done inside one file and or inside one model, although you can have multiple models and link them up using mixins. But the whole idea behind scope model is it's going to have your data and it's going to have your data communicate just from one model. So you don't have to have stateful widgets all over your app, and you have data calls inside these individual screens or inside this individual widget. So to just cut it short, scope model is just going to create a central store or a central memory or storage for your application. So I think I would just have to implement that to see how it actually works. So from this model, you can actually access the data it holds from different widgets. So the first thing would be to import scoped model, and next to import the HTTP package, because we're doing a API call. I think that those are the two stuffs we would need for now. So we'll create a class called property scoped model, and it's going to extend the model class. Cool. So inside this model, the first thing would be to create a variable called properties. So the first one would be a string variable, list variable, list of property, and it's going to be private. It's going to be empty for now. Then would import this class. Then what is the next one? So after we create this, we'll also create a getter for it. So the getter is going to be, let's see, going to be something similar, but it's just going to be a getter. So it's going to be get properties, and it's going to return this private member properties. So the next value would be a boolean value is loading. False by default. Then we also have a boolean getter. This is going to be private. Then we'll have is loading, which is going to return the private member. Okay, so the reason for making this is this private member is what we're going to be using to update these variables locally, that is in this particular class. Then this value we're going to use to get it outside this class. So that is it. We're just making our code more modular. So the next thing to do, so this is loading is going to show a circular progress indicator while we're fetching the data, and it's going to be set to true while we're fetching the data, and when we're done fetching the data, it's going to be set to false. So the next thing to do would be to create a function which is going to return a future. So I just want to do my HTTP request in this function. So it's going to return the decoded JSON data. So this is going to return a future of type dynamic, and the name of this function is going to be, let's call it get data. And inside this would go get the request we want to make now. So I'll copy this and I'll put it in a string. URI. Okay. So the next thing is to do a request http get URI encode full. Is that the correct one? Okay, I think so. So the next thing would be to also return JSON. Okay, we need to import that convert. Cool. So over here we'll do JSON dot decode rest dot body. Cool. So what this function does is it's just going to decode the results and we'll be returning it over here. Okay, so we just put async and wait. Since this is an asynchronous function, since it's returning the future, we'll put async before the function declaration and also put the await keyword. So cool, it now has body. So the reason why this stuff gives an error here is because if this code executes synchronously, I know some of you might know this, the body field is not currently available, but when you use the await keyword, it's going to assume we're going to get that body key in the future. So that is just that basic that. So let's see. Okay, so now we're done with this. Let me just continue. So the next function is going to be a feature. It's going to return a feature, and it's going to be get properties. I think it should be asynchronous. No, it should be. No, I think, yeah. So what get properties is going to do is get properties is going to actually get the value returned from this get data and serialize it with this serializer we created in our build value over here. So I'll show you how that stuff is going to work out now. So the first thing would be to get data response data, which is going to be so this is the response data from this function. So what we want to do now is to create a type Nestoria. So this is where we're going to be doing the serialization. So we're going to do we're going to import serializer over here. Okay, so before we do this, there's something we need to do, which is, let me just comment this out, which is related to this build value stuff. So over here, we've created these immutable classes for our JSON data. So the next thing to do would be to go create a serializer class, which is going to be what we would use to serialize the JSON data. So I'll create a new dat file called serializers, and inside the serializers I'll just paste this code. Okay, so I'll just paste this code, and what this code simply does, let me just, okay, after I paste it, then the next thing to do would be to go run our build runner once more. So what this serializer does, it's to create a serializer, you use the serializer for annotation, then you pass in a list of the classes you want it to serialize. So for this, we're just passing in Nestoria, and we're doing this simply. We could actually pass in Nestoria response and also property, but we're just passing in Nestoria because Nestoria contains this response and response contains property. So how this serializer stuff works, or how the generator works, is if we pass in only Nestoria, since Nestoria is going to be needing the response class over here, it will automatically generate the serializer. It's the same thing for the properties too. So back in our serializer.dat over here, we just pass in Nestoria in the list. Then for the serializer variable, we'll be using the standard JSON plugin, which is going to be generate serializing it into an output that is more JSON friendly. Because if we did not do this, if we just use the default serializer, I think it's going to create an internal linked hash map or something thereabout. But using the standard JSON plugin is going to give you a structure just like this, something similar to this, whereby you could access the keys and the values. So now that we're done with this serializer, and you can read more about this from the build value package page over here in datlang.org. So now we're done with this, we can head back to our property scoped model, and continue. And one more thing, while running this build runner, if you want it to continuously watch for changes, so whenever you change a file in probably your build value class or your serializer class, you change this build over here to watch. So instead of having build, you just have watch. So it constantly reloads whenever there's any changes, and it generates code for us. So cool. So the next thing we'll be doing is now continuing with this. So since this is returning a feature, we'll also use the await keyword here. So cool. So now the next thing to do would be to deserialize this. Let me see. Let me see. Okay, so since we just created this serializer, the next thing to do would be to import it in this file, because it is it that is going to be responsible for converting our JSON data into a class format that we're going to our application is going to understand. So I'll just duplicate this, and instead of importing scoped models, I'll import serializers. Is that correct? Where did I create this? Serializers. Yep. Oops. This is what I'm supposed to do. So since it's contained in our models directory, so we'll do serializers.dat. Cool. So over here in our get properties, we'll be doing serializers. What's happening? Okay. Okay, cool. So serializers.deserialize with. So deserialization is, we just want to convert the map value here, or the dynamic value here, into an object of type Nestoria, which is what we declared in our nestoria.dat over here. So we'll use deserialize with, and we'll pass in nestoria.serializer, which is gotten from here. Which is gotten from here. Nestoria.serializer. Remember, we declared it static. That is why we could just access it that way. So the next thing would be also to pass in the response data. So this stuff is going to serialize it into a structure whereby we can access its properties by doing something like nestoria.response.listings and so on and so forth. So cool. So the next thing would be to populate this properties list over here with the contents it produces. So to do that, I'll just do properties equals to nestoria dot response dot listings dot map. So we're using map here because listings is a list. So we'll just pass in property, then property to list. Cool. This is looking good. First things first, when we call the get properties function, I want to set this is loading to be true. So I'll just do is loading equals to true, then I'll call a handy function called notify listeners. So what notify listeners does is it rebuilds the scoped model descendant, which is what we're going to be talking about very soon. So notify listeners, whenever I change a value in this model and I call notify listeners, it rebuilds the model. So it's going to rebuild the model that changes. So instead of using set state now, we just use this notify listeners to update the states, to update the or to rebuild our model. So its loading is equals to true. Then after I populate the properties list, I'll set is loading is equals to false. Then I'll call notify listeners function. Cool. So I think this is looking good. This should work. So the next thing would be to head over to our UI and see and get this working. So in our main.dat, I'll just copy this into a new file. Inside screen, I'll create the screen, the search screen. Then I'll import the material widgets. So instead of doing this, I'll just use a list view. But before this, let me head back to our main.dat and let's implement something. So first thing would be to import this screen. So back to scope model now. For a scope model to work, you need three things. First, you need the model, which is what we've created. Then secondly, we need the scoped model. Then after that, we need the scoped model descendant. So what the scope model is just an entry point from the model to our application. So the first thing we need to do would be to wrap this material app in a new widget, and we'll call scoped model. So I'll explain more, but let me see. Okay, cool. So scope model is going to be of type property scoped model. Property scope model would import that too. So it's gonna need a model, and I'll be creating this model over here. Let me just I'll instantiate it outside the build function, and I'll explain why I did this as we progress. I'll show you why. So property scope model equals to property scope model. Cool. Then I'll just call this. Cool. So remember what I said, you need three things for a scope model to work. First, the model, which is what we've created over here. This is the model. Then the next thing is the scoped model, which is the entry point, or which gives a widget, kind of like a parent access, which is kind of just like an entry point from our model to our application. So with this now, every child of in this widget tree, every child of this is going to have access to the scope, to the model using the scoped model descendant. So the third part is the scoped model descendant, and I would implement that in our search screen. So I'll just remove this scoped model descendant. I hope I spelled it well. Cool, I spelled it well. Wow. Okay, so we'll also pass property scoped model okay, and it needs a builder, and this builder is going to have three things: the context, the model, and let me see what it needs. Okay, the context, the child, and the model. Okay, so the context, the child, and the model. Cool. So with this now, we now have access to the model declared in our. Okay, so we now have access to the model through this scoped model descendant. So remember what I told you about notifying listeners. So whenever we call this, is just going to rebuild the scoped model descendant over here. So this builder, we're going to return a custom scroll view, because we're good. I intend using slivers in this course or in this series. So we'll pass in slivers over here, and the first one is going to be sliver app bar. Title is going to be search for now. In the next part, we're going to be designing it. So property listings or property finder. The next one is we're going to do a conditional check here right now. So model dot is loading. So you see the beauty about scope model. Now we have access to this variable in a stateless widget. So from our parent model, now we have access to all these variables, is loading, and properties. So from our search screen, we can access it from the model variable. So we can now do model.isLoading. We can also have model.properties. You can see the beauty about scoped model. Instead of you handling all the whole logic in your individual widgets, you just have a central place to handle it, and anytime you want to update something, you just go to your model class and you update it. So that is the beauty of scoped model. So if it's loading, I want you to show if it's loading, or should I do return? If it's loading, no, then if it's loading, return sliver field remaining, child should center, child should be text. Oops, no, I'll just do this. Okay. Okay, so child should be a circular progress indicator. Cool. So return this, then else. I'm not supposed to have two statements here. Let me check something. Okay, this is not necessary. So if it is loading, show a circular progress indicator. If it is not loading, would show a sliver list. Okay, so the list is going to be sliver child builder delegates, and okay, nope. Context, index, and it is gonna return let me check if I'm correct. Silver child builder list delegate. Okay, indexed widget builder. So cool, context and indexed, I'm correct. So it's going to return text widgets and model dot properties dot index dot title. And one more property of this sliver list is silver child builder delegates. Let me format this and see. Okay, so the next one is the child counts. What property takes in the child count? Let me check. The silver, okay, child count. Okay, it should be after this. So the child count is going to be model dot properties dot length. Cool. Is there any other thing? Let's see if this works. Okay, so this is showing up. So back to our main. So over here we declared the property scoped model. So let's just call it from our my app widgets. So I'll call property okay, no. I'll call it over here property scope model dots get properties. Cool. And whenever my app load, I just want to get the properties. So we should see a circular progress indicator. Then after that, the next thing we would see would be the list of data. So cool, this is looking nice. It is currently working. So I think I'm a bit sloppy in this tutorial. I think I'm rushing things, but everybody was asking for a more advanced tutorial. I shouldn't do just UI, so I think this is how it will go. So if I'm moving so fast, you let me know in the comment section too. So yeah, so you can see right now we're actually getting this list, and let me just put this stuff, let me just format my code. Okay, cool. So add a little bit of padding. Cool. So we can see the data is actually coming from our scoped model over here. So you can see the progression here. So whenever I, okay, so you can see the progression here. So in our scope model, this is just a brief overview, or let me start from the beginning over here. In our nestoria.dat, back to our API request. In our API, we made a request to search for Brighton, for a place in Brighton in UK. So the response gave us a request, but we did not need that. We just needed a response. And inside the response, we needed the listings, which is of type properties. So listings returns a list of properties. So properties are this map over here is just one property, but we just took in the title and the summary. So back to the explanation. So this entire response is going to be housed in Nestoria, which is what we created over here, the Nestoria class. But inside the response, we just needed the response variable, and we got that over here. We just got the response. And inside the response, we needed listings. And you can see inside the response class, we have listings. So this is kind of like a logical way to map your response into a class. So the beauty of this is the immutability, whereby once you just declare this and you've generated this class, it cannot be able to change. You can't initialize Nestoria from somewhere and change one of all these things, or set the variable or cast them into something else. So immutability makes you avoid unnecessary errors from invalid states of your objects. So you have Nestoria. Inside Nestoria, you have response, which is this, and inside response we have listings, which is this over here, and listings is just a list of property. And you can see from property we got title and summary. So you can see the hierarchy we have over here: response, listings, and property. Response over here, listings, and inside listings we have properties. So after we did this, the next thing we did was to create our serializer class. And this serializer class is in charge, is responsible for serializing our objects into text data, or deserializing in which case we just did in our application, which is just to convert our dynamic value into the Nestoria object. And we use the standard JSON plugin to make this possible. So after we did this, we just came and created a new model class, and we created properties called properties, and is loading. Then we made a request to the Nestoria API, and we passed the decoded JSON. So the decoded JSON is just simply dynamic, which is what we're returning here. And the function we used in our UI is the get properties. We did not use this get data property in our UI. We used the get properties over here instead of get data, and simply because it is this get properties that lets our UI or our application know that we've changed values using this notify listeners. So after this, we also deserialized our response over here, and we mapped it to this Nestoria class, which has the response, and also inside the response has the listings. And we created a map that added each property from the list into the properties list over here, into the properties array. So you can see what it returns here is this list. So we have 1 to about 20 of them. If we scroll to the end, we can see total result of 2044. I think we'll implement this in the next video, but that is just basically what this stuff does. Then remember I told you to actually make use of scope model. You need 3 things. You need first the model, which is what we've created here. So this is where the whole data manipulation is going to be done. Then after the model, the next thing you need to do would be to create a scoped model widget, which is just like an entry point for our model we just created into our application. So we did this in our My App so that every other descendant in the child tree would have access to the model. So after the scope model, the next thing we did was to call our scoped model descendant, which has a builder attribute that lets you that gives you access to the model. So over here in the builder, we just returned the custom scroll view, and we did a simple condition from this. So if it is loading, show the circular progress indicator. If it is not loading, show the sliver list. So this is just how to actually get data using to serialize JSON using the build value plugin package, and also how to manage state using the scoped model. So you can see from this search page, we have access to the isLoading variable. So imagine a scenario whereby we have like up to 20 screens that would need to make use of this isLoading or make use of this properties variable. So we don't have to go and start creating stateful widgets to manage this isLoading state, because without scope model, what we would have done would be to make this search screen a stateful widget, and whenever we want to load data, we would have to do our HTTP call in this would have to do our HTTP call in the stateful widget and also set states. And this kind of approach is gonna make your app very hard to manage, because you have logic scattered throughout your application. But with scoped model, we just have one single model, and from here we can actually manipulate whatever thing we want to do. So that is it for this video. So in the next video, we're going to be styling this application to take it from this into this over here from the screenshot. So I'll see you in the next one.